From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Live Chat. Paul Mancano and Danielle Allentuck for a week in February that is fully the offseason, that is before spring training. Boy, was it a busy week for the Baltimore Orioles.
Probably one of the busiest in team history.
Yeah, easily. One of the busiest of any teams during the offseason. Like you said, I mean, we're going to touch on all of this, but the sale that has not been finalized, but has been agreed to, of John Angelo selling the team to David Rubenstein and company, trading for Corbin Burnes 24 to 48 hours after that. And spring training is just right around the corner, less than a week until pitchers and catchers report to Sarasota, Florida. So we're going to touch on all of that on this live chat and try to take your comments and questions as we go along. Danielle, let's start with the on-field move, and that was trading for Corbin Burnes. Orioles sending DL Hall and Joey Ortiz and a compensatory or competitive balance round pick, I should say, to the Brewers to get 1 year, essentially, of Corbin Burnes, Cy Young winner, three-time All-Star. And Danielle, we talked about it when they made the move. This is exactly what they needed, a front end of the rotation piece that they can slot in for opening day.
Right. I mean, at bare minimum, they just needed a starter. Yeah. They just needed a little bit of depth. They needed some extra help there. And the fact that they could go out and get somebody to lead the rotation, somebody who has that proven track record, is even better.
Yeah. I mean, when you make a move like this and you send away two prospects who were very close to the big leagues, for Joey Ortiz and DL Hall, who is already in the big leagues.
Right. And doing well.
Yeah. That is the biggest step forward, I think we could say, for Mike Elias in this front office to say, we are this close to being legitimate World Series contenders. We need something to push us over the edge.
Right. And accepting that you have to get rid of some of your beloved prospects who have come up through your system in order to do so.
Yeah. I mean, the trade for Jack Flaherty during the trade deadline last year, you sent away Cesar Prieto, who was in AAA at the time. You sent away an arm who was a little bit younger and in Zach Showalter. And you sent away Drew Rom, who was close to the big leagues as a AAA starter. But none of those guys were top 10 prospects in your system. Joey Ortiz is a top 10 prospect in your system. He is not in Baseball America's top 100, but he was hitting .331 in AAA last year with an OPS close to 900. And DL Hall was pitching in playoff games last year. I mean, he was pitching out of the bullpen, so there was certainly a limit for what he could contribute to this team in 2024. But these are two guys, I think, that will actually make an impact on Milwaukee's roster in 2024.
I mean, look, they're two major league ready players. I mean, they're just Hall, there was space in the bullpen, but probably not in rotation. And Joey Ortiz has just been blocked.
Right.
And he's going to get even more blocked when Jackson Holiday comes up. So there just wasn't room for them on the Orioles. It was good for them to get rid of them. They'll probably be starters or at least get consistent playing time in Milwaukee. And the crazy thing is the Orioles farm system is still going to be ranked number one,
right?
Even after getting rid of two top 10 prospects. So it shows how much work they've done building it up to get to the point where you can trade two top 10 prospects. And I mean, you're going to miss them, but not really.
Yeah, no, you certainly won't feel their absence all that much this season. I think you might have felt DL Hall's absence a little bit more, because he was closer to being able to contribute in the bullpen. And maybe now Mike Elias looks for another lefty who can try to contribute in that bullpen because that would have been a spot where DL Hall could have, made an impact on this team. But Joey Ortiz, like you said, Jordan Westburg was already in the big leagues and proving that he could play second base, third base, maybe even shortstop in a pinch. And he was hitting for average. I mean, he can do a lot of things in the big league level already. So it would be very difficult for Joey Ortiz to unseat him. Jackson Holiday could very well, at 20 years old, make the opening day roster. He's the top prospect in all baseball. Joey Ortiz is not going to get any playing time over him.
No.
Gunnar Henderson is locked down short/third. He's going to get everyday starts. And you still have Ramon Urias and Jorge Mateo. And I know, defensively, you could make the case that Ortiz was big league ready. And certainly he was hitting for a very high average in AAA and maybe eventually would have been a replacement for Jorge Mateo as a right-handed bat. But he doesn't quite have the speed of Jorge Mateo. No. And it's pretty clear how much Elias and manager Brandon Hyde value what Urias and Mateo bring as veteran presences in this infield.
Yeah, I mean, they stuck with Mateo in particular throughout all of last year. I mean, he had that great April where everybody was like, oh, where does Mateo come from?
Yes.
And then he greatly trailed off. And there were a number of times where Hyde was asked about him, kind of along the lines of, why is he still on this roster? And it's because they really valued what he could bring defensively and on the bases. I mean, he's speedy, one of the fastest guys in baseball. His shortstop skills, they're top notch. And, at that position, it's a lot. You're going to value defense over what you can bring into plate in most cases. So,
yeah. And so they stuck with him when they could have brought Joey Ortiz up and tried to, either trade or move on from Jorge Mateo. That told us a lot about what they think of Jorge Mateo, what his defense, what his speed bring.
Right. And then they tendered him a contract, too.
Right. Yeah. So it was going to be nearly impossible for Joey Ortiz to find any kind of playing time.
Right.
Unless there were significant injuries to your infield. Joey Ortiz was going to be blocked this year, and he's 25 years old. He's spending another year in AAA when he's already on the 40-man roster, taking up a roster spot. I think it's good for him, and it's good for the Brewers. It just works out for everybody that he is getting a fresh start somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that he is going to get a chance to prove that he can be a big league starting infielder.
And if you're going to trade Joey Ortiz, it had to be in this time frame. If you stick him back down to AAA for a year, his value is only going to deteriorate because other teams are going to see that and think, why, if this guy is majorly capable, why is he not in the major leagues?
Exactly. Yeah. And he's just a year older. It just would not be ideal. There's always injury possibilities, so it would not be ideal for him. It would not be ideal for the team. They kind of clear that logjam a little bit. They still have a glut of infielders. But DL Hall in the bullpen, that's the spot I think that they might feel this loss a little bit.
I think they definitely will. But, the thing is, it's February 8th. There's 8 weeks until opening day, if my quick math is right. Yeah. And, we've seen Elias add arms late in the year. We've seen him add him late in spring training. Danny Coulomb last year, right before opening day, ended up being, one of their best contributors last year in the bullpen.
Yeah.
Jacob Rebb got added in August. So there's plenty of opportunity to add arms throughout the year via waiver pickups. They can make a trade once the season starts that they realize they need it. So I think it's something that they will have to add if maybe mid-season, not now.
Yeah, and the addition of Corbin Burnes maybe bumps Tyler Wells to the bullpen.
I would think it will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if he had not been bumped to the bullpen, he would have been taking a starting spot. And maybe that kind of domino effect, allows Tyler Wells to build a strong season in the bullpen. And I know he's not a lefty, so it's not a perfect comparison.
Right.
But certainly the Orioles have enough talent in that bullpen to be able to get through I would think portions of the season. And you would just much rather be in a situation where, let's say this team still is in need of a lefty reliever come July. You would much rather be in a situation where you're needing to trade for a reliever than you are a starter, because
absolutely
the going rate for starters at the deadline is several top prospects.
Right. I mean, it's also much more feasible.
Yes. Yeah. A lot more teams are looking to trade those kind of arms. I think we will see, like you said, some arms traded before the start of the regular season. Emmanuel Clase is being thrown around in trade conversations. Orioles probably don't need a closer, so to speak, because they have Craig Kimbrell.
But it can't hurt.
Yeah, it can't hurt. So whether it's a lefty, whether it's just another righty, I think Mike Elias will find somebody before opening day to add to that bullpen depth.
And I know Corbin Burnes is essentially a rental. I mean, he's only going to be here for a year,
right? At
least guaranteed. But I feel like for a reliever, you're much more likely to be okay with getting a rental, a guy who only has a year left on his contract or team control.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about Corbin Burnes and what he brings to this team, because he is a rental. And that's why I thought it was unlikely when we were going through the trade options and we're throwing out Dylan Cease and we're throwing out Edward Cabrera and Paul Blackburn. We were saying it was probably unlikely that the Orioles would make a move for Corbin Burnes, only because he's going to be a free agent. And he's talked openly about how every player in Major League Baseball looks forward to getting to free agency, getting to pick where you're going to play for the, duration of your career.
Right.
It's an enviable spot. And he is probably not likely, for that reason, to sign an extension before he hits free agency, unless he's going to be blown away by an offer.
Right. I mean, this deal was done before new ownership. I mean, the
Right.
sale has not been finalized. This was under the Angelos regime.
Yes.
So we don't know for it's.
We think it was a coincidence.
But it
We have to
probably
believe it this
wasn't. But
Yeah.
I don't know if we're able to know for sure.
Right.
But there is new money coming into this team, and that if the sale will probably be finalized before the end of the season.
Mhm.
The Orioles will have a jump on every other team to be able to start negotiating a potential extension. So
Definitely.
even if he does, want to get to the point where he hears offers, the Orioles will have, a month or so, or they can even start as soon as whenever they want to start talking about extensions, but especially after the season ends, they'll have a month before he goes on the open market. So they have a huge leg up here to try and extend him.
And he did indicate, Corbin Burnes did in his introductory press conference, that if he's going to be discussing an extension, he probably want to do that before the regular season, which is how most players feel. They don't like to get negotiations done during the season. They want to get their business done before they start playing.
Right. He did say that. And he's been very open. Like you said, he wants to see what all of the offers are before he talks openly about it.
It would cost quite a lot, though. I think some fans are thinking, we can easily extend him. It would be handing him a record-breaking contract, at least for the Orioles. They would have to hand him more money than they've ever handed anybody.
It would have to be a multi-year guaranteed deal, which we still haven't seen Elias do.
Yes, exactly. So it would cost quite a bit of money. The Gerrit Cole contract is, I think, a good comparison to make here. When Gerrit Cole hit free agency, he was a year younger than Corbin Burnes is now. So he was entering his age 29 season. Burnes is going to be entering his age 30 season next year. So that's when he would hit free agency. And Gerrit Cole at the time had 3 All-Star appearances. Corbin Burnes has 3 All-Star appearances. Burnes has a Cy Young award, which Cole did not at the time. He has since won one. But he did have 3 top 5 Cy Young finishes. So I think they were kind of comparable players at that point.
Right.
Cole had more success in the postseason. Burnes has not, but that's, probably just a factor of not being on a team like the Astros, like Gerrit Cole had been. And you know how much Gerrit Cole got? 9 years, $325 million from the New York Yankees. That would be the going rate for Corbin Burnes. And that was 2 years ago. So the rate might have even been increased. So if the Orioles are going to be extending Corbin Burnes, they're going to have to at least be in that ballpark, which would be an utterly absurd jump over what their previous record had been for a contract, which of course went to Chris Davis.
I mean, maybe new ownership money would change things, but I don't know how they could afford that.
That would be massive.
Yeah.
It would be absolutely massive.
And you also have to look at market sizes here. I mean, the Yankees, top market, Orioles, where are they 15 to 20, somewhere in that range.
Right.
It would take a lot to extend him. I don't know, unless Corbin really loves Baltimore and loves the Orioles. I wouldn't count on him being able to sign an extension like that here. Yeah.
They would have to, give him more than he might expect in free agency. And if he's going to expect 9 years, 325 or more,
there's no way.
Yeah. So if you're getting him for just a year, I would still argue that what you gave up to get Corbin Burnes is not a whole lot, and it's worth it. Because you're giving up DL Hall, like you said. You're giving up Joey Ortiz. You're giving up that 34th overall pick, which is an awfully nice pick.
Which, by the way, was one of the most shocking parts of the trade to me.
Yeah.
Elias loves his draft picks, but he talked the next day about how he wishes this was an option earlier.
Right.
That they could have traded more draft picks.
Yes.
And I guess earlier for him would have meant acquiring more draft picks, but
right. Yeah.
That part really shocked me.
For the fans who don't know or were surprised to see that a draft pick was traded, because it's so rare, because the only picks that you can trade are competitive balance round picks. And those competitive balance rounds happen after the first round and after the second round as well. So that's how the Orioles partly have been able to stockpile as many picks as they have. They acquired a competitive balance round pick in the Tanner Scott Cole Sulser trade that sent them to Miami. They love these picks, and they hit on them with an incredibly high rate. I mean, the area between, the competitive balance round pick, the second, the third round, we've seen them draft guys like Kyle Stowers. We've seen them draft Gunnar Henderson. Guys in that range, Jordan Westberg was the 30th overall pick back in 2020. So they hit on them at a very, very high rate. And for Mike Elias to willingly give that up was a little bit surprising.
Yeah. I mean, I said it. Shocked me, honestly.
Yeah. But you look at the state of the farm system, number one farm system, even after the trades of DL Hall and Joey Ortiz.
Yeah.
You didn't give away Colton Cowser or Heston Kjerstad. Obviously, you didn't give away Jackson Holiday. You didn't even have to give away Samuel Basayo.
Right.
Those are really your prize prospects. Kobe Mayo, you didn't have to get rid of. So you are still maintaining a very strong group of prospects. And you're adding guys like Enrique Bradfield Jr. to that list, and Dylan Beavers, and Cade Povich, and Seth Johnson. So you are still very deep. And so I think he said, look, I love my picks. I would love to make that 34th overall pick in a few months, but this is a worthwhile gamble to get a pitcher of Corbin Burnes' caliber. Yeah,
I mean, a starting pitcher is the most important guy on the field every night for the most part.
Yes.
So you need somebody you can rely on. I mean, Orioles pitchers proved last year that, they got a little fatigued at the end of the year. They couldn't handle the postseason as everybody expected him to. Maybe they'll learn from that this year. That is to be seen. But they needed somebody like that. And they also didn't give up any of their future depth to do so. I mean, Joey Ortiz, realistically, as we said, does not have a starting spot on his team for the next few years. And I don't even know when his pass would be.
Yeah.
DL Hall, that one probably will hurt their bullpen a little bit, but they have options there. Yeah. But by not getting rid of Colton Cowser or Heston Kjerstad, they're outfielders for their future. Austin Hayes and Cedric Mullins and Anthony Santanera, they don't have that much longer guaranteed in Baltimore. They need to know that they have, those outfielders who can replace them.
Exactly. And what you're getting in Corbin Burnes is a top end of the rotation kind of pitcher. I mean, he is a true capital A ace when you add to this rotation. You talked about, the Orioles in the postseason when they lined up Kyle Bradish for game 1, they had Grayson Rodriguez for game 2. Yeah. They were probably going to go with John Means for game 3, but he unfortunately suffers that setback, that injury. So they go with Dean Kramer. So you're talking about Bradish was a second-year pitcher. Grayson Rodriguez was a rookie.
And who only spent half the year in the majors.
Right. And Dean Kramer was the most seasoned of those guys, and he debuted in 2020. So really young 3 starting pitchers for a playoff series. And what I love about this move for Corbin Burnes is if they had just acquired a guy who was going to be a back end of the rotation guy, a 3 through 5 starter, that wouldn't raise the ceiling of this team.
Right.
He might help more during the regular season. He might help eat some innings and take some of the burden off the bullpen, but he wouldn't. It would be a question of whether he would even start a playoff game. Michael Lorenzen, if they had signed Michael Lorenzen, which they could still do and add to that depth, but if they had just settled for a 3, 4, 5 starter instead of getting an ace, there would be a question of whether that guy would start in a playoff series.
Or even make a roster, honestly.
Exactly.
I mean, look, this team had no trouble getting through the regular season.
Exactly.
They won 101 games.
Yes.
Was every start perfect? No. But no start is perfect for every pitcher every day in a baseball season. It was the playoffs where not having that high caliber starter hurt them. Yes. So this would hopefully remedy that problem.
Yeah. I mean, depth matters a lot during the regular season. It's 162 games. Yeah. It's a slog. You go through injuries. But I would argue it matters much less when you get to the playoffs. Yeah. It's much more about the top end talent that you have. Are my 9 guys better than your 9 guys?
Right.
And I think we saw with the Rangers, it's the reason that they swept the Orioles in the ALDS, and I think it's the reason that they got to the World Series is their 9 was better than everybody else's. You know, they had Marcus Semien and Corey Seager in the lineup every day, and they had top end starting pitching. Orioles may have had the deeper roster, but that didn't help when it came to a playoff series that was just best of 5. I mean, a 3-game playoff series, essentially. You got to be able to line up 3 of your best starting pitchers, and the Orioles did not have the 3 best starting pitchers in that series.
And it wasn't even that competitive, to be honest. I mean, 2 of the games were blowouts. The first one that Kyle Bradish started, I mean, he had an okay start. Yeah. But they could not keep up with them.
Yeah. Starting Corbin Burnes in game 1 of a playoff series, and then a more seasoned Kyle Bradish in game 2, and a more seasoned Grayson Rodriguez in game 3, that series would have a much different feel. And probably, at least 1 or 2 of those games would have a different outcome than it would for how it went last year.
And imagine if they won game 1. Yes. What the momentum for the rest of the series. I mean, by game 3, I was in Texas. They were defeated.
Yes.
They kind of knew what the outcome was going to be before they played that game.
Yeah. And Grayson Rodriguez, like you said, hopefully Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez learn from their experience.
Right.
Grayson Rodriguez has talked about, maybe he was a little bit too amped up for that game because it was a pressure-filled environment. He had never pitched at that in that kind of crazed Camden Yards in a playoff game and needing a win. The fact that, like you said, they lost game 1, all the pressure was on Grayson to go out there and shove in game 2. And that's a very difficult spot to put a rookie who had some high highs, but he also had some low lows in 2023.
And I think he, of the three, will take away the most from the playoff series. I mean, he has said how much he has learned from it. I mean, his stuff is there.
Yeah.
It's always been there for the most part. I mean, even when he got sent down to the minors, it was just cleaning things up and learning to control himself, as you said.
Right. So adding Corbin Burnes to the top of that potential playoff rotation. Obviously, injuries happen. You never know what's going to happen over the coming months. They have to get to the playoffs first. Mike Elias was very reticent when he was talking about Corbin Burnes to talk about a potential playoff rotation because they got to get there. They're going to be in, one of the toughest divisions in all of baseball. But when you add somebody to your rotation who has a proven track record, who is a big game pitcher. By the way, he's a couple years ago, 2022, 200 innings pitched. The last Orioles pitcher to throw 200 innings in a season was 2016 Chris Tillman. It has been quite a while. We've talked about Jordan Lyles and Kyle Gibson being innings eaters. Corbin Burnes is an innings eater while also being an ace.
And he's done it twice.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, it's not just the volume of innings, but the quality of those innings is incredibly impressive. And Elias mentioned that during the press conference. He said he's the kind of guy that you take the ball from him, he's going to want to be back out there 5 days later.
Yeah.
He wants to stay in as long as possible. We know the Orioles value that because they want to give their bullpen as much rest as possible, and they want to help their other starters. Adding somebody who is ready to just chomp down on innings is going to be big.
And it will be. I mean, Kyle Gibson, like you said, I mean, he didn't even get close to that number. And they were talking about how useful he was for that team to just go out and pitch 5, 6, 7 innings every time. Corbin can top that for them.
Yeah, exactly. And one other thing that I should mention, we talk about the draft pick that the Orioles lose in this trade, the 34th overall pick. If they were to offer Corbin Burnes the qualifying offer after the season ends and he were to reject it, and it'll probably be about $20 million, but that'll be an easy rejection for him if he's healthy. They would get a draft pick as compensation for that as well.
Yeah.
So add a draft pick. It probably wouldn't be as high. It depends on the size of contract that Corbin Burnes would sign with another team. But they would get at least a pick back if they were to go through the season with him, offer him the qualifying offer, and he rejects it and signs somewhere else.
So it was kind of, they thought of that going into it when they gave up a draft pick.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's talk about the ownership factor to this, because that is a good transition. Would the Orioles, try to extend, or maybe once he hits free agency, re-sign Corbin Burnes? I think you could make the case they would have to get, top priority would be extending the guys that they already have in-house, like an Adley Rutschman and a Gunnar Henderson.
Right.
I think a lot of fans, when this deal went through, when John Angelos agreed to sell the team to David Rubenstein and company, immediately assumed that the payroll is going to skyrocket, that all these extensions are going to get done. We still don't know anything.
Right.
It is a very, very wealthy group with some deep, deep pockets. And I think that is what is exciting about all of this when you look at the group that is coming in to buy the team.
And I think if you look at the two previous teams who have gotten sold most recently, the Orioles and the Mets, and they took very different paths here. I mean, the Mets run out and Steve Cohen spent all this money right away, and it didn't work for them.
Yeah.
Granted, they weren't extensions. It was a little bit different the way they went about it. They went really big in free agency, but he ended up trading off half of the people that he had acquired and lost a bunch of money.
Yeah, paying the teams to take them off their hands.
Right. And then the Orioles, who were sold a few months before the Mets, they've taken a very slow approach. I mean, they didn't have the same internal talent depth that the Orioles do, but they have recently this offseason gone out and they're like, okay, we're ready. They're spending the money now. They're doing the extensions. And part of me wonders if the Orioles would follow a similar path to that, maybe a year or two to get their bearings, new ownership gets settled, and then start responsibly spending the big bucks.
Yeah, I think when that trade went down, when Steve Cohen bought the Mets were much worse positioned at the time. They didn't have the kind of talent pipeline that the Orioles had. And they probably made some risky short-term moves.
Yes.
Like you said, to go out and trade for Francisco Lindor and extend him, and then adding Max Scherzer in free agency and
Justin Verlander.
And it just felt like a very hasty trying to Band-Aid over a lot of the deficiencies on this team.
It was like, how fast can I prove to you that I'm worth it to be your owner type of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Trying to win over fans that way.
Right, and trying to buy Carlos Correa. The problem with that was they didn't have the infrastructure that Mike Elias has built here.
Right. And I think because Mike Elias has, kind of slowly built up this team, I just think that it's going to be probably the same way of ownership.
Yeah,
exactly. I wouldn't expect them, the second the sale gets approved. I don't think we're going to see the next day extensions. Right. I think if they're going to come a little bit later.
Exactly. So this deal is for $1.725 billion, just a cool 1.725. David Rubenstein, who is the leader of this group, he went to City College, so he has the Baltimore ties, went to Duke, went to Chicago Law School. He's the co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group, an investment firm which manages $382 billion. He also notably bought and loaned the Magna Carta, one of the last remaining privately owned copies, and then spent like $10 billion for an exhibit to house it as well in Washington, D.C. Bought the Emancipation Proclamation, bought a copy of the 14th Amendment. I think
he's a bit of a history buff if you haven't figured it out.
Yeah, and I think fans are saying, well, if you're willing to spend, $26 billion on the Magna Carta, how much would you be willing to spend on, Adley Rutschman's extension? Right. Which is fair. And then Michael Bloomberg, who is also a billionaire, he is the wealthiest member of this new ownership group. He's worth $96.8 billion, Danielle. What would you do with $96.8 billion? Would you buy a team?
No.
What would you do with it?
I don't know. Buy a mountain house.
That would not even dip into it.
Pay off my student loans. I don't know.
There you go. Yeah, that would also not even make a dent.
I just can't even fathom that. No, yeah.
That is enough money to give every person in the world, I looked this up, $12.26. Every single person in the world can get $12 if you just decide to split up all his wealth. Wow.
Go for it.
Yeah, sure. Wow. So that is the kind of money that's also being added to here. You also have Michael Arrighetti, another billionaire. He's the co-founder and CEO of the Ares Management Corp, which manages $341 billion in assets. Cal Ripken Jr., of course, love the local tie, love the tie to the history of the team. It's nice that he's going to, have a say in a lot of this stuff. Michelle King, who's the owner of the DC Spirit. Kurt Schmoke, who is the former mayor of Baltimore. Grant Hill, NBA Hall of Famer. He grew up in Fairfax, Virginia, and his dad, Calvin, used to work in the Orioles front office, so he has that tie. And Mitchell Goldstein and Michael Smith are both partners at the Ares Group. So, wow, this is a lot of money coming into this team.
It is.
We don't know if they're all going to spend it on players, but it is nice.
And it's a well-balanced, impressive group of people.
It is.
I mean, adding Cal Ripken, he has been... You see him on TV every night in his spot behind home plate. He has been committed to this team even after he's been playing. He's been wanting to get involved. Yeah. And we don't know what his, how involved he'll be in a day-to-day, but I would imagine he would have, some say just based off of his experience and just who he is. But it's a really impressive group of people and coming from a lot of different areas here.
Yeah, and Cal obviously has, built up the Aberdeen Ironbirds, that whole project, and has done a very good job building a very good facility there. And he's got the Cal Ripken Baseball League. So he has already shown that he can manage a lot of business ventures in that way. Look, should billionaires exist in general, Danielle? I don't know.
That's a whole other podcast
that probably is way above our heads. But I think it is nice when fans are saying, the money in this way is on our side. When you have a billionaire backing you, that is a good feeling.
It is. And Austin Hayes, as reported, has come out and said, he would be interested in an extension here. Right. And that is a huge shift for this team of a player unprompted, basically bringing up that he would be open to an extension here. In my limited time in Baltimore, I have not heard that. Right. So players, themselves realizing that there is now an option here where, okay, like there's a new owner here. Maybe they can extend me and sign me that multi-year deal. While as before, they didn't know if Elias would do that. The answer was probably no.
Right. And it's not necessarily, probably wasn't up to Mike Elias.
Right. Yes.
And he has been very, very cautious. The longer that, the more questions that he gets about extending players, the less he has to say.
Yes.
And now he is pretty much shut down in terms of extension talk.
Yes.
But if you're extending somebody on this team, talked about Corbin Burnes, you mentioned Austin Hayes, who would be your top priority? Let's say you have that $96.8 billion. You've already spent it on your mountain house. You've already paid off your student debt. Who would your first call be to try to extend? Would it be Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson?
Jackson Holiday.
I
mean, look, he hasn't played a major league game yet, but if he is as good as they say, lock him up now.
20 years old, has not made that debut yet.
Correct.
You already have a superstar in Gunnar Henderson.
You do, and he'd be my second call.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Adley would be your third?
Adley, and then Grayson would maybe be, I need to see a little bit more from him. I need to see a little more consistency. I think if he goes out and has a great year this year, I mean, we know what his ceiling is.
Yeah.
We know what he's capable of. But he just has to do it for me over the course of a full season before I'd be willing to spend the money on him.
Yeah. Now, a starting pitcher, if you can have him under contract for a long time, would be certainly valuable.
Yes, but not necessarily one who goes through quite the waves he does at this point.
Exactly. He's 24 years old, so he's still young, but like you said, not as proven as some of the other guys on this list.
But I think he's close. You know, I think that maybe 1 or 2 more years, I'd be comfortable extending him long term.
Yeah. Now, Adley is an interesting case because he's going to be in his age 26 season right now, and he's going to be a free agent after the 2027 season. It's been well documented that catchers, once they get into their mid 30s, once they hit about 33 to 34, the physical decline really starts to take its toll.
Right.
Would you be interested in giving him a contract that pays him until he's 36, or would you be worried about that?
I'm not sure. And I think the other end of this is the Orioles don't know what Samuel Bayo can do yet.
True.
And he also has the potential to be as good, if not better, as Adley Rutschman.
Oh.
We don't know.
He
has the potential. That's what the scouts are saying.
Yeah.
He's a little more raw defensively than Adley was. But he's also younger.
Yeah.
So there's still time. So part of me wonders, I mean, I would still give Adley an extension. I don't know if I would go 10 years to have him locked up till he's 36. Maybe 5-6 years is much more realistic for him.
Right.
Especially if you already have a 20-year-old catcher in your system who could easily be the replacement for him. But again, we don't know what he's capable of yet.
Yeah. I will say Adley, though, the heart and soul of the team.
Yes.
The first draft pick by Mike Elias, a leader in the clubhouse from everything that we've heard, face of the franchise type player. Samuel Bayo might have the ceiling, but would he be, it's possible he could be that kind of player and clubhouse leader as well. But we just
don't know yet. Yeah. But if we're talking 10 years from now, just the age difference there, you never know. Yeah.
Can Adley, be a Buster Posey type, which is just rare.
Right. Especially nowadays, as you said.
Yeah. But I would bet on him to be able to, at least if he stays healthy, to maximize that and be productive into his mid-30s.
Right.
But it is still a gamble. Whereas if you're extending somebody like Gunnar Henderson, who's 22, and is going to be playing shortstop and third base at a very high level for the next maybe 10 years.
Right.
Then you start to talk about it.
But
all this is theoretical. All this is hypothetical. We don't know yet. And I will say, when Peter Angelos bought this team in 1993, I'm old enough to remember that. I'm not. He came in and bought this team, and it was I went back and looked at a lot of the newspaper clippings at the time, and he was being hailed as this, Baltimore native who came in, swooped in to buy the team and to ensure that it was going to be in Baltimore for a long term, and it was going to flourish for a long time.
Right.
And that was how he was hailed. And he did a lot of good things as owner.
Yeah.
It might not be popular to say now, but for the first, 5 or 10 years, he had several important contributions, most notably not crossing the picket line and agreeing to sign, players during the strike in 1995, which partly kept Cal Ripken's streak alive. That was a big historic moment, and he was absolutely on the right side of history in that way.
Yes.
He was also willing to invest in his team. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that it gets forgotten now because of, what we've seen in recent years,
Mhm.
but he almost spent too much on players and probably got them into some dire straits. And he
Right.
meddled perhaps a bit too much in the day-to-day affairs of the team.
Mhm.
And inserting his opinion into player evaluations that led to some bad signings. But
Right.
at least he was willing to invest the money and the time into the team.
I think whenever you have a new owner, there's that optimism. There's, okay, we're safe now. Like, we're going to go win the World Series.
Right.
We have new money. We have somebody new who's interested.
Yes.
And I don't know the data off the top of my head, but it just doesn't happen that quickly. I mean, none of the teams who've got a new owner in recent years have gone on and won the World Series the next year. It
Right.
takes time. There's always going to be that hope, and you just have to wait and see.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that David Rubenstein and this new ownership group can do is give Mike Elias the resources he needs,
Right.
but also sit back and let him work.
Yes. He's proven to this point with John Angelos as his control person, who is, we think, is very meddling into the day-to-day. We don't know for sure, but he's proven to this point that he can do it.
Yeah.
So let him continue to do his job.
Yeah, and just give him the resources he needs while also not making the mistake that Peter Angelos did. And I would argue that Steve Cohen did with the Mets, which is you are the point person for players, for agents, and you are the one negotiating these deals.
Right.
Let Mike Elias do his job, but also make sure he has the financial backing that he needs.
Yes. I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to swoop in at the end. If somebody needs to be convinced, host them for a fancy dinner. Like, that is where you as the owner come in. But let the people you hired with the baseball knowledge do it.
Exactly. Well, it's going to be a fascinating several months as we sort this out. We entirely don't know when all of this is going to be finalized, and spring training is going to be less than a week away. So we're going to have a lot to talk about over the next coming weeks. We are going to be down in spring training for the start of pitchers and catchers reporting, then position players reporting a few days later, and we will have complete coverage there. At @D_Allentuck is Danielle's Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano, and please do subscribe to the Baltimore Banner. $1 for 6 months. We have complete coverage there, as well as all over social media. Danielle, can't wait to see you in the Sarasota sun.
See you soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks so much to everybody for tuning in.